According to NBC News Online, beginning Tuesday morning at 3 a.m. Eastern Time, the White House has implemented a restriction on passengers flying in from 10 overseas airports against carrying any electronic devices larger than smartphones on flights. According to a senior White House official, the restriction has been put into place amid concerns by evaluated intelligence indicating details that terror groups are actively targeting aviation, including smuggling explosives and electronic devices. There are no details about how long the restrictions will be in place, and U.S. officials did not offer more specifics into the intelligence or when it was obtained.
A trip to Washington seeking assurances that a Donald Trump administration will continue to support Iraq in its efforts to defeat ISIL. On the campaign trail, Trump pledged to defeat ISIL, and shortly after taking office, he signed an executive order ordering his generals to come up with a plan. That proposal has been presented, but the White House is still evaluating its ISIL strategy in Syria and Iraq.
I know Mosul is moving along, but Mosul was ours until we left. So perhaps we shouldn't have gone in, and certainly we shouldn't have left. We should never, ever have left.
Currently, there are almost 5,000 U.S. troops assisting coalition forces, providing air power, training, and advice. That's down from a peak of more than 170,000 in 2007. The effort to eradicate ISIL, also known as Daesh, since 2014 from its stronghold in Mosul, has caused financial crisis for the Iraqi government in search of further funding to finish the job.
We are killing Daesh. We are proving that Daesh can be killed. Daesh can be eliminated. And we can do it, not only in Iraq, in the region.
But there may be another role for the United States in Iraq, many believe is vital, to promote cooperation and act as a balancing force against sectarian and Iranian Shia influences within the Abadi government. That's in addition to efforts on the battlefield.
If we want to see Mosul liberated, we need to work together at this. The Iraqis deserve most of the credit for doing most of the hard fighting, but they don't quite have enough capacity to handle this on their own.
On Wednesday, Iraqi dignitaries will join dozens of other nations here in Washington to discuss accelerating ISIL's defeat. This as the White House weighs risks and rewards of U.S. involvement in Iraq's conflict that after a generation, many war-weary Americans no longer support.
More than 800 people, both people who were injured on 9/11 and family members of those who were killed, filed a lawsuit against the country of Saudi Arabia on Monday. The lawsuit, brought in the federal court that covers Lower Manhattan, is years in the making. It took an act of Congress, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, to allow private citizens to sue a foreign government for its alleged involvement in terrorism. Saudi Arabia was duplicitous, the suit said. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson plans to skip an April meeting of NATO foreign ministers for a U.S. visit by the Chinese president and will travel to Russia later in the month. Tillerson intends to miss what would be his first meeting in Brussels with the 28 NATO members in order to attend President Donald Trump's expected April talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. The decisions to skip the NATO meeting and to visit Moscow risk feeding a perception that Trump may be putting U.S. dealings with big powers before those of smaller nations that depend on Washington for their security. Trump has often praised Vladimir Putin, and Tillerson worked with Russia's government for years as a top executive at ExxonMobil Corporation. Any visit to Russia by a senior Trump administration official will be carefully scrutinized after the director of the FBI publicly confirmed his agency was investigating any collusion between the Russian government and Trump's 2016 presidential election campaign.
President Donald Trump appears disappointed as the news media continues to focus on the ongoing investigation of whether his campaign had improper ties with Russia during the election. Trump took to Twitter early on Monday morning to say, James Clapper and others stated that there is no evidence POTUS colluded with Russia. This story is fake news and everyone knows it. Trump again argued that the Russia story was a narrative made up by the Democrats for their failures to win the presidential election.
A plane carrying more than 50 French soldiers lands at the Amari Air Base in Estonia. The arrival marks the beginning of the deployment of nearly 300 French troops to the British-led multinational NATO battalion. France is contributing tanks, vehicles and artillery.
First, we are expecting to train our interoperability with first the British Army and the Estonian Army to improve our level.
More than 200 UK troops arrived in the country on Friday. NATO decided during its summit in Warsaw last summer to deploy troops in the Baltic countries and Poland. In total, 4,000 NATO troops in 4 separate battle groups will monitor for and defend against any potential Russian incursions.
The Trump administration is considering sweeping sanctions aimed at cutting North Korea off from the global financial system. The consideration is part of a broad review of measures to counter Pyongyang's nuclear and missile threat, a senior U.S. official said on Monday. The sanctions would be part of a multi-pronged approach of increased economic and diplomatic pressure, especially on Chinese banks that do the most business with North Korea.
We have the will and capability to fully respond to any war which the U.S. wants. If the businessmen turned U.S. authorities think that they can frighten us, they will soon recognize that their method will not work.
Well, the statement comes from the country's foreign ministry and was read out on state-run TV. The statement also said that the world would soon witness the results of a recent jet engine test as part of its missile program. During his trip to South Korea and Japan last week, Tillerson said the U.S. was considering a wider range of options in dealing with the DPRK, including the use of military force.
Duck and cover. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Fire is a danger, but we are ready for fires.
North Korean missiles are also dangerous, but how should those at risk prepare? On Friday, Japan held its first evacuation drill for citizens in the northern city of Oga based on a simulated missile attack. The coastal town is one of the closest points in Japan to the area where a series of North Korean missiles have landed in recent months. Over 100 residents, many of them elderly, evacuated to an elementary school and a community centre. Officials say it's safer to be in strong buildings that provide some protection from blasts and debris if a missile lands nearby. The drill comes after North Korea fired 4 ballistic missiles in March that landed about 200 miles from the coast of Japan.
危機意識を常に市民が持っていると非常に意義があると思っています。
移動式のそういうミサイルでなかなかその迎撃が非常に無理のような状態だということで非常に心配しております。
The rising threat from North Korean missiles has also increased calls from hawkish Japanese politicians for the ability to preemptively attack North Korean missile bases if Japan appears under imminent threat.
The government of Taiwan is looking to expand its arsenal of aircraft with a purchase of American fighter jets. After Taiwan completes a transfer of 2 decommissioned U.S. frigates, the government of President Tsai Ing-wen will request more modern aircraft to replace their aging fleet of F-16s. The decision to purchase new aircraft follows a recent review of Taiwan's defense capabilities. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry prepares a review every 4 years, but the fighter jets and frigates are part of a greater proposed defense budget estimated at $11.4 billion.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte said he can't stop China from building structures on the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. The president made the statement at a press conference March 19th. This comes just a few days after Chinese officials announced they will soon start construction there on an environmental monitoring station. Duterte also said declaring war on China was not an option and would leave the Philippines a, quote, destroyed nation. The Scarborough Shoal has long been a source of controversy in the South China Sea, with both countries claiming sovereignty over it. China blocked access to Filipino fishermen after seizing the shoal in 2012. The move prompted Manila to take the dispute to a United Nations tribunal where the Philippines' territorial claims were upheld. Duterte said he won't invoke the arbitral ruling now, but does plan to use it in the future to, quote, tinker with the entitlements.
On Monday, just days after meeting with Saudi Arabia's King Salman,
China welcomed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as the country steps up its tentative engagement with the Middle East. Despite its reliance on the region for oil, China has traditionally played only a small role in conflicts or diplomacy with the Middle East. At a meeting in Beijing's Great Hall of the People, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang praised Israel's advances, calling the country a world leader in some technologies. Li said, "The Chinese people and the Jewish people are both great peoples of the world." In a statement, Netanyahu claimed there was much to talk about in tech cooperation between the two nations.
In China, certain parks have installed facial recognition devices in public restrooms to make sure bathroom users are mindful about their toilet paper use. The bathroom user has to stand in front of the device before using the bathroom in order to receive their 24 inches of toilet paper each bathroom user is rationed. The facial recognition device will also recognize a person's face long enough to not allow them to use the bathroom again until 9 minutes have passed.
Billionaire philanthropist David Rockefeller, former head of Chase Manhattan Corp. And patriarch of one of the most famous and influential American families, died on Monday. He was 101. Rockefeller, who reportedly gave away nearly $2 billion in his lifetime, died in his sleep of congestive heart failure at his home in Pontecito Hills, New York. One of the few remaining links to the U.S. Gilded era of robber barons, he was the son of John D. Rockefeller Jr., who developed New York's Rockefeller Center and was the last living grandson of oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller, founder of Standard Oil in the family dynasty.
On Monday, tech tycoon Bill Gates met with President Donald Trump at the White House to talk about the future of the global health initiatives and domestic education. Sarah Logan, a spokesman for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, released a statement saying the pair met to discuss the tremendous progress made to date in these areas and the critical and indispensable role that the United States has played in achieving these gains. The meeting comes only after Trump's administration submitted a budget proposal that will cut the foreign aid which Trump said would keep Americans safe. On Friday, Gates argued against the cuts. Stephen Hawking has never been a fan of President Donald Trump. Last year, Hawking confessed to being bemused by Trump's rise and called him a demagogue who seems to appeal to the lowest common denominator. Website CNET reports that this week, however, the renowned British physicist went even further in suggesting that America is heading in a troubling direction. In a recent appearance on Good Morning Britain, Hawking shared that he thinks that Trump was elected by people who felt disenfranchised by the governing elite in a revolt against globalization. He also insisted that climate change is a central issue and one that Trump's administration is ignoring.
According to a new poll, the fact that Donald Trump is undeniably the nation's 45th president doesn't sit easily with young Americans. They are the nation's increasingly diverse electorate of the future. The Gen Forward poll found 57% of young adults see Trump's presidency as illegitimate. The tally includes about 3/4 of blacks and large majorities of Latinos and Asians. Gen Forward is a poll of adults age 18 to 30. It is conducted by the Black Youth Project at the University of Chicago with the Associated Press, NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. A slim majority of young whites in the poll, 53%, consider Trump a legitimate president. According to the survey, among that group, 55% disapprove of the job he's doing.
A 30-year-old accountant from Philadelphia has sued a New York City bar after he says he was denied service because he was wearing a hat supporting President Donald Trump. Greg Pitek says in the lawsuit that he and his friends were initially served drinks at the Happiest Hour in January, but he says once a bartender noticed his Make America Great Again hat, he asked Pitek if it was a joke. He says a second round of drinks was slammed down on the bar. The suit claims a manager later asked Pitek to leave, saying he was told by the bar owner that anyone who supports Trump or believes what you believe is not welcome here. His lawyer said the incident was humiliating and called it his client's saddest hour.
Philadelphia's Latin American community is in no mood to party due to a fear of an immigration crackdown. Normally, an event called El Carnaval de Puebla is held in the city in the spring. It's a commemoration of Mexico's victory against France in the Battle of Puebla, which is also the inspiration behind Cinco de Mayo. But this year, the event has been canceled. Organizer Edgar Ramirez told NBC10 that in light of recent stepped-up immigrations and customs enforcement actions against illegal immigrants, there were concerns that Carnival participants would be in danger of deportation. Co-founder David Pina also told Al Dia that the cancellation was an act of protest against President Trump's policies. According to NBC10, the event generally involves 450 marchers and as many as 15,000 celebrants. Whether or not Carnival returns in 2018 remains to be seen.
It's morphin' time.
When the Power Rangers movie morphs into theaters, it's going where no superhero movie has ever gone before. The big screen reboot of the children's TV show is the first major superhero movie to feature a main character who's gay. That character is Trini, the Yellow Ranger.
I'm pretty sure I'm a superhero. Cool.
The Hollywood Reporter revealed there's a scene in the film where the rest of the Power Rangers learn about Trini's sexual orientation. The film's director calls it a pivotal moment. Characters like DC's Harley Quinn and Marvel's Iceman have been written as gay or bisexual in the comics, but they've been portrayed as straight in their feature film adaptations. This is the second LGBTQ character to make headlines this month. When Disney revealed LeFou from its live-action Beauty and the Beast would be its first gay character, many outlets said it was a poor representation because LeFou is a villainous sidekick. And in the end, the quote, exclusively gay moment turned out to be just that, a blink and you miss it moment. Power Rangers debuts in theaters Friday.
Screenagers Growing Up in the Digital Age is a documentary that discusses and addresses both modern-day internet and phone addiction. According to new studies, a modern American teenager spends at least 6.5 hours looking at digital devices every day. 60% of teenagers also said that they text and use social media while doing homework, and 76% of them listen to music. Noted sociologist Sherry Turkle says this type of tech use is hurting more than helping. She states, what's extraordinary about the studies on multitasking is even though you're doing worse and worse on everything you're doing, you feel as though you're doing better and better. Teenagers will soon need to lower their tech usage.
Analysts monitoring the electronics market predict that wearable devices are ready for growth. According to the International Data Corporation, worldwide wearable device shipments are expected to grow from 102 million units to 237 million units by 2021. With new vendors, emerging form factors, developments in mobile software, and a growing number of retail outlets led the IDC to calculate a compound annual growth rate of 18%. Although IDC focused their predictions on smartwatches, they also believe ear-worn devices and smart clothing for fitness and coaching will grow as well.
At least 2 people were injured after shots were fired at a motorcade carrying former Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide in an apparent assassination attempt. Aristide, Haiti's first democratically elected president, was leaving a courthouse when shots were fired directly at the vehicle in which the president was a passenger. Ira Kurzaban, a Miami attorney who represents Aristide, told NBC News. Aristide is still wildly popular among Haitians who see him as a heroic figure who made it out of the slums to attain the highest office in the country.
Security forces have ended a deadly standoff between inmates and guards at a Guatemalan prison. The hostage situation began on Sunday when inmates took control of a prison located near the capital. Security forces have stormed the cells after negotiations ended in a stalemate. 3 prison guards were killed. The protesting inmates, who are gang members, wanted better food and a transfer of 250 minors of the same gang from other prisoners.
Officer Herrera says he doesn't know when the family that lived here was forced out.
The owners used to sell tacos. They abandoned their house because they had to pay a war tax.
War taxes are imposed by the gangs. People must either pay, leave, or be killed. 34-year-old Yamilet faced that choice in the city of San Pedro Sula. She fled.
The gangs told me to either leave or choose the way I wanted to die. Then they forced me to sign and transfer my property to them.
Gang threats occur nearly everywhere in Honduras. 5 months ago, an armed gang entered this neighborhood and forced 34 families out in one night.
We left because you can't live in fear.
Isaac Flores says they were lucky because the army was called in to patrol the neighborhood and they were able to return.
Many neighbors here say the military presence makes them feel safe, but this is only one of a few neighborhoods around the country where soldiers are patrolling.
A government study of 20 municipalities says 174,000 people were displaced in the last decade, and that's just one study representing only 20% of the country.
The study is an approximation. It should be done in all of the country, because if the people are moving, the state is not protecting them appropriately.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees representative calls it a silent crisis. In most cases, people leave without reporting the threats. They don't go to the government for help, finding refuge instead with relatives or friends.
People believe there is no government response to help them because there is no security or justice system that may guarantee that a person who forces displacement of another will be punished.
Yamilet says even then, she would be too afraid to return.
I know what the gangs are capable of doing. They kill anyone, and I am afraid for my children and me.
Most of the gang's victims are poor who don't have the means to leave, and they must submit to the gang's rules and live in fear.
Uganda's South Sudan refugee situation is proving to be a major test of commitment in applying a game-changing approach to the refugee situation worldwide. The East African country is allocating farmland to refugees willing to grow their own food as a way of promoting self-reliance as opposed to waiting for world food handouts. The country is also continuing to open new settlement areas to accommodate thousands of those fleeing famine and unrest in South Sudan.
Even if the entire South Sudan gets dislodged into Uganda, we will have no choice as a country that is a signatory to the Geneva Convention. We have no choice but to provide sanctuary for them.
South Sudanese refugees are reportedly fleeing into Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Central African Republic. Almost half of these have crossed into Uganda and are being resettled in the country's West Nile region. But government officials say the rate of new displacement is alarming, representing an impossible burden on a country that is significantly poorer and which is fast running short of resources to cope. At present, funding for South Sudanese refugees in the region is at just 8% out of the required $782 million. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees' own funding appeal for Uganda is reportedly short by more than $250,000. The South Sudan regional refugee crisis comes as the United Nations raise concerns over Juba's purchase of weapons equivalent to half the country's total budget expenditure, while 100,000 people are dying in a famine experts say is caused mainly by increasing government military operations.